So welcome to this panel on overview of learning analytics initiatives, including the Open Learning Analytics, the Learning Analytics Master's Program, the Learning Analytics Community Exchange. Our speakers in this panel include Josh Barron from Marist College and the Apereo Foundation, George Siemens, who I think you probably know by this point today, me, who I'm talking to you, and Doug Clow from Open University. So we'll have presentations by each of the speakers, and then we'll open the floor to questions.
It's your moment in the light, Brian.
Yeah. Everybody hear me all right? Sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to go through this very quickly so that we all get a chance to talk, and hopefully my goal is to stimulate lots of questions that we'll take during the kind of rest of the panel session. So let me start by talking a little bit about what we mean by open learning analytics. And I'll stress here, at least this is the meaning that is in my head, may not be yours. That could be a good discussion point. I really see it as this kind of open ecosystem that if we can establish it, will really help sustain and grow. Oh, I lost my college now. Help sustain and grow learning analytics over the long term. So some of the things that might be part of this ecosystem, things like open learning analytics software, so analytics engines, dashboards, things of that nature, open standards and APIs for collecting data, bringing it to a single repository, open models, be able to release predictive models or knowledge maps under open licenses for others, not just to come and freely access, but hopefully enhance, contribute back to the research community. Open content, there was a lot of discussion this morning about open access journals, papers, MOOCs, and so forth. I think that's a really important aspect of this ecosystem. And even openness and transparency in policies and strategies. So we talked about ethics, and I mentioned this Bill of Rights, and the ability to take policy documents like that, put it out openly for people to share and enhance. The last point I think is pretty important because there is sometimes a myth and confusion between, let's say, open source software and being kind of anti-commercial. At least those involved in the Open Learning Analytics initiative so far, I think really feel strongly that it's not anti-commercial. In fact, I think it's a critical role for commercial activities in the ecosystem to sustain it over the long period. So why is this kind of important to be focused on? A couple of points. I think a lot of the work to date in learning analytics, particularly that which is being implemented at scale, is very much tool or software centric. So we have things like Blackboard Analytics or analytics tools in your ERP systems or your library systems. If that's the future, we'll have all these kind of silos of different tools with different data sets, but nothing that's bringing everything together in one large data repository for data mining. I think openness can help solve that. We've also had a lot of work happening in proprietary sectors, which is not a bad thing, but when these models and the work that's going on, the software is locked up behind proprietary closed licenses, very hard to see how these are working. You're an institution and these predictive models are making decisions for you. You really want to know what those decisions or how those decisions are being made. We also have a lot of silos of different activity, different standards bodies, different projects and grants and activities going on. And I think openness will help break some of those silos down and get collaboration happening between them. So a few things that have been happening in this space, you're now aware of them. We held our Open Learning Analytics Summit following the LAC conference this year in March. That was sponsored by Marist and University of Wisconsin. And I had a lot of representation and involvement with folks from the Apereo community. If you're not familiar with Apereo, Apereo formed about 2 years ago through the merger of the Sakai and JSIG open source software communities. There was just a lot of work going on that was similar in both communities, and it's since for us to come together. There's about 25 open source software projects for higher education that are now part of Apereo. These are a few of them. You might be familiar with Sakai or Central Authentication Service or OpenCast and so forth. So a couple of outcomes from the summit. I think one of the most significant was we kind of boiled down to these kind of 4 major domains that seem to exist within open learning analytics: software and standards, strategy, policy, learning design, learning sciences, research and data. Groups formed around these 4 domains. They looked at what was going on in those domains, where gaps were, where things should be happening but aren't, where there are groups that aren't yet connected in and involved that need to be, and so forth. And right now, groups, in fact, a couple of weeks or a week, we'll have a follow-up phone call, going to be working to build all this into a white paper that eventually might lead to seeking some funding. Another major initiative, at least from the Apereo world, is the formation of the Learning Analytics Initiative in Apereo. And the goal of this group, which is really right now being led by Marist College, University of Amsterdam, and Sinclair Community College, although others are going to join shortly, is really to try to operationalize, in terms of software development, a lot of the things that are happening in the learning analytics research community. I won't go into a lot of details here. Alan Berg, though, is actually our community officer, and he's helping co-chair the LASI event in Netherlands this week as well. One of the initiatives the group is working on, and this is just starting, so I think in the next 6 to 12 months we'll see a lot more tangible work or software come out of this, is really starting to flesh out this kind of open learning analytics software framework. And the 5 kind of major components that we're looking at right now: one is around data collection, the other is data around data storage, analysis of the analytics engines and so forth, communicating the results of those of the analytics out to other systems that need to be alerted about the outcomes, and then action, intervention systems that would actually then go about and do something as a result of that analytics. Right now, the community, Marist, and one of our commercial partners, Unicon, is building out this first component, which is really part of that analytics component that I mentioned a minute ago, which is this learning analytics processor. It's building on top of work that we did over the last couple of years under Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant to create an open source academic early alert system. So we're going to be automating that. As this matures, you'll be able to plug in different analytics engines, different models, and so forth for this kind of early alert system, and then generalize it to do even more down the line. Some of the things that are we're working on next in the open learning analytics community, I mentioned this white paper already. We're really actively looking to have that turn into grant proposals to seek funding to mature some of this work. I mentioned the proof of concept software developments underway right now. And the last is the LAC conference, which maybe I should say the Madrid of the United States, that George mentioned earlier. And we're planning at this point to have kind of an Apereo solar hackathon as part of a pre-conference workshop, so we get researchers and software developers to come together, do some hacking together around this kind of work. But also would love to hear from this community and others, other things we could be doing around open learning analytics at that event. So with that rapid firing, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
I think our second speaker is George.
Okay, just make sure. Looks like this is now on testing. There it is. Okay, so one of the initiatives, and thanks for the introduction there, Josh, to what's happening with the Open Learning Analytics Initiative. I want to introduce a second project or activity that we were involved with, and this is SOLAR and the International Educational Data Mining Society. So we met at Carnegie Mellon in at the end of April, and one of the discussions that we had was, given, and this is actually based on, Shane Dawson's idea. So if Shane has an idea and you're anywhere nearby, you'll end up having to do the work. And so it was actually at LASI14 where he referenced that all these places are setting up analytics programs. Universities are paying attention to it. There's growing interest for students who want to become familiar with basic techniques and analysis approaches. So why don't we, because many of our universities respectively will be over the next few years creating a master's program, or at least a stream within a master's program. I mentioned earlier Teachers College already has one. I think Ryan's is probably the first one that I've heard come out, but I know a range of other universities that are paying a lot of attention to this. So Shane's idea, and I think it was an excellent one, is what if we get together as a group of individuals who have an interest in learning analytics master's programs, and why don't we decide who develops what, and then just freely share it and make it available. So now this, and some of this, if you're familiar with the MOOC that Ryan ran last year on Coursera, he's taken all of his MOOC resources and put them openly online in what he's calling a MOOT, an open, massive open online textbook. And so you can look at this. There's a group of people like Ryan who have this ethos of openness that would like to make their resources available. And there's a group of programs that are going to be developing master's initiatives in the next while. So that's the core idea that Shane put forward, and that's where we've started some work on this. Our first formal meeting happened toward the end of March at Carnegie Mellon. And so we had a group of folks attend, Dragon from Athabasca, time, Ryan Baker, John Stamper, a group of other folks that were there, Carolyn Rose Taylor Martin, I'm not sure if she's here yet, myself and a few others that engaged around what has to happen. And so we spent the first time, the segment just talking a lot about how can we collaboratively articulate what would be involved in a master's program, how can we then start discussing ways in which that content could be made searchable and available. A lot of issues around granularity as well. I mean, do you make your master's content in learning analytics available at a outcomes competency layer? Do you make it available as an entire course block? I mean, there's this relationship that David Wiley has articulated that the bigger your learning resource that you're sharing, the less usable it is across multiple contexts. The smaller your resource is for sharing, the less likely it'll be used in multiple contexts. It's so granular and specific. So anyways, those are some things that we're still grappling with, but basically we spent a couple days together thinking through what we need for master's programs going forward, and our intent is to make these resources so it's a full master's program, 100% open, and accessible and reusable by anyone that wants to make this part of their program. So in theory, we could have a college or a school of education or information studies or computer science that wants to take parts of an open curriculum, and they could either just take the whole thing, rebrand, as long as it's traditionally with a Creative Commons license, as long as it's recognized about the source. They could then deploy that full scale as a master's program in their own institution, or correspondingly they could just take a smaller strand of it and just take a few courses or even a few modules. Now, after spending our time together, just give you a quick overview of some of the things that we looked at that would be involved in this program, and then I'll talk a little bit about next steps. So first of all, obviously privacy and ethics, you can't overstate that particular discussion, but it's also a very complex one, and it's a multi-year conversation. That's why it keeps coming up. Anytime there's an event, somebody's talking privacy and ethics, but it's hard to wrap your head around. But anyways, that's one key area. Learning analytics processes and theory, experimental design and methodology, methods for learning analytics and EDM, a range of different activities, data management, visualization, list goes on, psychology of learning theory, learning sciences, assessment, evaluation, and so on and so on and so on. And so basically what we did at this first meeting was we spent the 2 days articulating what would be involved in a master's program. We identified a series of organizations, a series of individuals, we should say, that are already doing some level of teaching related to this topic, but they may not have their resources openly available. So the intent now going forward is to create a timeline where we can say these are the course topics, these are the individuals that are going to develop or make them open, because in a lot of cases the easiest way to do is find somebody who's already teaching an assessment and evaluation course that has a learning analytics orientation, and then ask them to just make it openly available and license it in such a way that it can be reused. So that, quite simply, is the idea of the Learning Analytics Master's Program. The goal, as I mentioned, is pretty straightforward. Make it accessible and reusable so that we can increase the quality of instruction, the quality of learning materials that are available for not necessarily researchers in learning analytics space, but for people who are going to be users of analytics or who are going to end up making decisions at a school or a university level based on some of these ideas.
Great, so I thought I'd say a few words on open learning about open learning analytics, which is now open for business. I was trying to think of another way to work out their open, but in recent years, I feel like this talk, everything I say is going to have been said by somebody already today, and I didn't realize they're going to say it. But there's a lot of interest in creating graduate programs in MOOCs and learning analytics. And I just thought it'd be worth asking, who here is in an institution developing a program in this area? Few hands, that's cool. And who here is an institutional program besides those that has or soon will have courses, even if not a full program? That's great. So please share your resources. Let's get them all together. Let's learn from each other. George has already talked about LAM, and George has already mentioned that we are working on creating a master's in learning analytics. It's currently pending approval from New York State, and hopefully we'll attain that approval before the next millennium. It's currently actually in existence called the Focus in Learning Analytics as part of the Masters in Cognitive Studies. So if you want to learn learning analytics, come to our Masters in Cognitive Studies and take the Focus in Learning Analytics. Some of the courses it has include Core Methods in Educational Data Mining, which is like a heavy methods course. Learning Analytics Process and Theory, which is like more of a deep philosophical George Siemens-y kind of thought-provoking course. A Feature Engineering Studio. I actually find that the design studio classes I took as a grad student were a particularly good way to learn how to engineer data and how to get meaning out of it. So we actually have a semester-long design studio for it. We also have a course on privacy, ethics, and other related issues by Gary Natriello, and a course on managing educational data by Amy Nurnberger, which deals with how do you actually get your data in a way that that you can actually get it back out later, and that it's not a horrible mess, and that you haven't broken yourself or your data. So all the course materials for my courses are up on the web, including syllabi, lecture slides, and assignments. And I would encourage everyone here to take them, use them, improve them, tell me how to make them better, and what's it called? Give credit. But please make them better, and the materials for the course will be up soon too when they are around. It was mentioned Big Data Education, a MOOC. My contribution to the lexicon, which is not nearly as successful as MOOC, but it's completely open access and free, so please make use of the resources. And I see this as a template for what we could all do. And if we all start to share these resources, then that'll help LAM in creating kind of a unified master set that represents both a core, what everyone seems to agree is important, and a diversity of other topics that people think are useful. That'll enable, for example, a graduate student at London Knowledge Lab to be able to see how people are considering these things different at Teachers College and vice versa. This has already been mentioned. And if you have resources publicly available that we don't know about, please tell us during discussion or email us so we can make sure to make it available. So thank you very much, and let's go to our last talk by Doug Clow.
Let's see if this is working. That's fantastic. Microphone works. Tell we're a technology-ish conference, which really fills with the technology. We can always have some issues making that. Oh, it's not that one, it's not that one. Ah, see? I lose already. Thank you.
Software.
This is why we work as a community and we support each other, and together we can do much better things than we could do just on our own, which is kind of the theme for what I'm going to be talking about. That's excellent, as soon as that starts working. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project called LACE, which stands for Learning Analytics Community Exchange. The URL there, laceproject.eu. If you take nothing else away from this talk, take that away, because that's a way of connecting up with us and with what we're up to. It's funded by the European Commission with money for a couple of years. But as well as telling you about this, I think what I'm really interested in doing is starting a conversation about how you build a learning analytics community. This project is one way in which we're funded to try and do this across Europe, but I'm interested in this in a general sense. When you think about what a community is, how you build that, there's all sorts of theories about that. I start thinking about shared activity towards shared goals. I'm mostly, in this talk, going to be talking about the activity that we're doing, but I think it's also important to be talking about the shared goals, which I think we've heard a lot about already this morning. It's about improving learning based on the data, taking a model that someone else produced in LAC 2012. I like to think of this as a cycle. We're starting with the learners, getting data and it feeding back, and it's having an intervention. I think there's valuable work to be done taking data from learners and producing metrics, distilling that down. That's educational research, that's great. That's a very valuable thing that they've been doing. There's a lot of that stuff where the pressure isn't really caring about getting it back to the learners necessarily. There's also a lot of interventions go on that affect learners that have no connection to any data or evidence or anything that has ever come from learners, rather than being something that is done to them. But I think as this community, I'd like to think that what we bring together is that concern both for the data, the evidence of what's going on with actual learning, and feeding that back to affect learning and improve it. So if that is something close to our shared goal, what sort of activities are we talking about? In LACE, we're bringing together a number of partners from across Europe. That's a picture of Europe for those of you who've never heard of it. It's a continent over a little bit over to the east of here. We've got people from a range of places with a range of expertises from a lot of exciting and interesting places like Bolton and Milton Keynes in England. They're well worth a visit if you've never been. We're looking across sectors and across ranges. We're looking at schools, K-12 level of education. We're also interested in workplace training context for learning domain, higher education context, my particular interest and focus, and also about cross-domain studies, looking across those, building frameworks of quality indicators, and across different sorts of domains of learning analytics. We're thinking about the content, the stuff that the learners are learning from, learning material, learner support, stuff that is going on in the middle, and looking at assessment, performance, and those sorts of metrics. And what are we actually doing? A lot of us in the consortium are academics, so what we do when we do anything about anything is we write lots of stuff, we produce lots of words. That's how we do anything, is by producing more words so that we've got more books. We're producing journal articles, white papers, learning analytics review on a blog, more serious technical focus blog, or lighter phase one, putting stuff on Twitter. By writing and producing stuff, that's helping to scope out what's going on, communicating, passing things on. Another strand of activity that's a big one is around events. We're hosting a series of events, some of which have happened, some of which are coming up. We're hoping to host a solar flare at the Open University UK in the autumn. That should be really awesome. You should totally come or follow us online. Also running workshops at other events, coming up at other people's events, talking about what we're doing, what I'm doing now. So that's a way of getting there. And we have a series of webinars. So we as researchers, we might like to think we're creatures of pure thought, but we are also social primates. So that sort of making contact with people and actual community building, I think, is a clearly important part of what we're doing, as well as the online stuff to give us the scale. Another strand to what we're doing is a thing we're calling an evidence hub, where we're going to try to do a bit of sense-making activity, tracking activity, adding a curated level of intelligence on top of the literature we already have about learning analytics, This is building on some work that my colleague Simon Buckingham done on evidence hubs and sense making, and also on there's a related project on open education resources in my institution, looking at evidence hubs to try and structure the evidence that we've got. And the key insight here is that to structure this around a set of key questions about learning analytics, and then map how each piece of evidence is evidence for or against some proposition or other, and try and use that to make sense of the evidence we've got, to try and see what we do know, and also, more importantly, what we don't know. So, I've been talking a lot about sort of a few practical things in summary detail. To answer my own question before you get a chance, but that way I get my answer in first, I think to develop as a learning analytics community, I'd like us to develop what we know about what we know. So that's the producing publications, the evidence of this sort of events and things. But also there's the social interaction to help more people to know more people more. And also in the crossover way to help more people know what we know, and to develop what we know about who knows who, sort of session, that sort of stuff. So that's, I think, what my idea about what we should be doing to develop as a learning analytics community. Very interested in discussing and working for it. And if you're interested in working with us, get in touch. The URL's up in the top right-hand corner, so that's really great interaction design there. And to tell you the most important thing, but that's up there. So I'll finish there. I think I forgot anyone else.
Before we have questions, Dragon is going to make a quick announcement.
Yeah. So I have a quick overview of the journals as well.
Do you have a mic?
There's one. So the last initiative we wanted to talk about, and we actually just recall that we have another important initiative, and that's the Learning Analytics Journal, right? So the Learning Analytics Journal has been announced over a year ago. So the Learning Analytics Journal has already published the first issue. That issue was announced in April already. So you can easily access that first issue. It is important to note that the journal is having 3 issues annually. The journal can receive submissions anytime, and the next issue will be published during July. We already have it prepared, so everything is being copy-edited. We just are waiting for the last few editorials to be finished, and during July. That will be the follow-up of live 13 papers, and the third issue will be also published by November. We also have that issue lined up. It will be guest edited by Belardo Pardo and Stephanie Teasley. It will be based on the best papers from Lab 14. So it is important to say that, and that question already came up earlier this morning, that the journal is completely open access. So all the papers are peer-reviewed. We don't have double-blind, we have just blind peer review process, so that's something we can discuss. We also have all the papers at least reviewed by 2 people, and it is important to say that the journal is welcoming papers which are both research as well as practice papers. So practice papers are hotspot papers that we call. They are emphasizing innovative ways how learning analytics are applied and evaluated. On the other hand, we have research papers which are full-fledged research papers requiring full research. Our editorial team is completely here. So Phil Long is here. Phil, identify yourself. Shane Dawson is over there. So together with me, they are editors of the research section of the paper, and Megan. Megan, please identify yourself. She is the editor of the hotspot sessions, the section. So please, if you have any questions about the journal, let us know. We have also 2 special issues in the preparation. So the call for papers for both of these special issues, it can be found on that table over there, printed copy, so please feel free to come there and pick up. So the first special issue has the submission deadline in August. It is guest edited by Ida Roll from the University of British Columbia and Phil Winnie. Phil Winnie is right there, so ask Phil if you have any questions about the special issue. So it is about self-regulated learning and learning analytics. And the second special issue, which is due in November this year, it's about learning analytics and learning theory. It's guest edited by Aliza Wise and David Schaefer. So we expect this issue to be published by mid next year. Another important thing, and probably LASI is a great place to discuss this, is during the review of the literature and citation analysis that George earlier mentioned, which we published and presented at the LAC conference earlier this year, we identified that the majority of the papers presented at the conference are authored by the computer science researchers participating in the conference. On the other hand, we identified that most of the papers from different special issues that we analyzed dedicated to the topic of learning analytics were authored by researchers from the educational research field. And we are seeing kind of a slight disbalance or kind of lack of balance, and we need to improve that. So why would researchers be going to a conference where they cannot present anything, right? While we understand that for computer scientists it's very important to have strong peer review paper, for educators they can care less about high quality peer review in a conference. It's just a conference presentation for them. So one of the ideas we have is that we would try to experiment and try to invite the papers or the authors of the accepted papers in the journal to come to the conference and present their papers. So in that way we can improve this kind of lack of the balance and make sure that the voices of education researchers are heard. While preparing this quick presentation, Ryan also asked me to quickly mention the Journal of Educational Data Mining. This is a journal we are learning a lot from. This is, as Ryan mentioned, our older sister's journal, and we are really getting a lot of great feedback and comments from Ryan and the editorial team. They already have 5 issues there. They are having really good, strong papers, and I'm sure a lot of experience to share with us. One important thing is that papers can be submitted anytime, so there is no need for you to wait for any special issues. The same applies to the Journal of Learning Analytics. So papers are welcome anytime, as soon as you have them ready. Editorial team, 2 editors are available here, associate editors, Mikola Pechenitsky. Mikola, could you identify yourself? So if you had any questions, Mikola is there. Ryan is here. All right.
I completely forgot to mention a dragon earlier. This is totally my fault, not dragons. That we actually have our own special issue call for papers, which is embarrassing because the guest editors are Ryan Baker and Alex Bowers. You'd really think I would know. But it's on educational data mining with longitudinal data sets. Manuscripts are due August 15. If you have any questions, get in touch with me. And again, if you want to just submit to the journal in general, Nicola or I or the editor, Michel Desmarais, is not here, but he'd be glad to answer your questions. So with that, I think we'll go to questions. We have a bunch of questions from LASI locals. I was thinking it might be nice to kind of maybe do a question here and then a question from them and back and forth. So, the Cheryl panel coming on up.
Up there, okay.
And Dragon, you have to stay up too.
Have a mic there, wireless, you'll have to pass it around.
I've got one.
Oh, you got one? Okay, Dragon and I will share.
Josh is with that.
Okay, do you have the stuff online, Ryan?
I do. So I guess we'll take Nicholas' question and then the first one.
Hello, my name is Mikola Pachiniski. So I have a question about Open Learning Analytics initiative. And the question is whether you already have a plan to collaborate with MOOC platform providers or any other providers of online education. Thank you.
Well, sure, very briefly speaking, some of you may be aware of the MOOCDB initiative, which I think has come out of a few folks at MIT. There are also other open learning analytics initiative, that IMS and other organizations are running. So one of the first things, or the next things we have coming up, is to produce a, for lack of a better word, a position paper, how we see learning analytics, so that, let's say, Calibre and others can look at what we're trying to do, and they can then decide if there's any connection or overlap. Similarly, the MOOCDB group, which is trying to coordinate activity with both edX and Coursera and likely others, and at this point, that's still more of a discussion than sort of a definitive specification yet. We're very much interested in not duplicating what's being done already. By the same account, we're also very much interested that it serves a broad range of learning needs, because MOOCs today are a convenient buzzword, but I think we're all kind of getting sick of it at some levels. The real issue is digital learning and the way that we can use the data that's generated there, so we need to move beyond just addressing needs of any particular type of vendor as well.
I'll just add that some of my staff have been up, saw Peter somewhere over here from edX and done some hackathons with them, so there's been some informal activities along those lines as well.
Great, so from an unnamed person on the internets, will LAMP resources be available to everyone, even if not an enrolled student? Well, I would think yes. I don't know that we formally made a policy on that, but certainly everything I do is available. I would think that the goal is to make an open resource.
Yeah, so far I haven't seen a Creative Commons that says, attrition but no student. So, it's a Creative Commons license, which means it doesn't matter who or what or where you are. The only conditions are around whether you can use it for commercial or non-commercial purpose and a few other things. But absolutely, a student, it'll be a standard Creative Commons license. Students and even individuals who have no interest in a formal program in learning analytics will access those resources, or be able to.
Do we have another question here, or I can do another one from the web?
Hi, it's Jane Maven again. My question surrounds digital publishing of open resources. Because there is, a wonderful community of openness, we get a real spectrum of digital publishing quality in the materials themselves. And I'm looking to work to have an open education resource library and work in open textbooks. And I'm working currently with a publisher who has 30 years of experience in digital publishing and education. And what he's doing is taking those materials that are still adaptable and still flexible and turning them into very beautifully published materials. So have you begun to approach funding or those with the expertise to make those materials really a good design experience for the end user?
Well, I'm sorry that I'm answering all the questions, so maybe ask someone else. But so the first view is, when it comes to openness, my view with activity that I engage in is I make open what I think is interesting. If anyone else wants to add a value layer on top of that and take those resources and publish them beautifully and adhere to the conditions of the license, I'd say have fun. We are at this point not looking at interacting with formal publishers. We're essentially a group of academics, profs, researchers that are making our content available. If somebody wants to stitch it together at a program level, so the University of Michigan decides they want to offer a Learning Analytics Master's program, they can take any or all of those resources, add their own, skin it in such a way that reflects the look and the feel of the university, then they can absolutely do that and invest those resources. We would, of course, encourage them to share back to the main community again, because that's the attribution and share alike approach that we like with Creative Commons. But those are value layers that I'm not interested in adding. We will likely include some feedback mechanism that individuals can comment on the quality of the resource, so there's some curation or group curation that's involved with it. But at this stage, we will be down the road seeking engagement with funders that would like to move this forward a little more aggressively. But at the end of the day, and we were quite clear on this when we first met at Carnegie Mellon, is we don't want it to be, if we get dollars, we'll do this. The mindset is we're going to do this because it's important for learning analytics and educational data miners that they have access to these kinds of resources. Ideally, if we have some dedicated resources, we can improve the quality of it, include the search functionality on the website, and a range of other attributes.
The process of taking all George's stuff and making it really nice looking, and then I'll sell it to you for $50. So, but seriously, if you're probably familiar with flat world knowledge, so I think there's some interesting kind of emerging models around bringing commercial activity into the open content space to provide that kind of improved, enhanced design. There's a small charge for that. There's some cost, but I think it's an interesting balance. So that's one place I would point to.
So let me quickly throw in one from the internet. How will your OLA approach to privacy and policy work given different contextual approaches to these areas? Are you simply providing a flexible framework? Kyle Jones, UW-Madison.
So I guess the first answer is that it's all just conceptual at this point, so no real specific answers. But I think we're really looking to create a framework with then tangible, practical examples from different parts of the world with different perspectives on privacy and ethics, all released under Creative Commons licensing, so anybody who thinks that it should be something different, or maybe there's a different cultural, societal kind of viewpoint on something, can go and make that change, contribute it back. The other part of it, I think, that came up during the OLA Summit was not just producing these policy documents, but also strategies around introducing these to various constituents at your institution. So the message and communication to a provost might be very different to a student, to a faculty member, but also providing that kind of information about not just here's the policy on a piece of paper, but how to actually implement that at your institution.
I see really interesting potential for synergy between the open learning analytics and the LAMP program, where you could do problem-based learning, where you could have students who are master's or PhD students doing a few courses towards their learning analytics or educational data mining degree, actually looking at open data sets maybe that come out of some of the OLA people, or even contributing new methods and so forth. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've explicitly kind of considered between those two initiatives, or if that's you know, you're just waiting to get them both off the ground before you follow up on something like that.
Well, I'll briefly dive in on that one. The short answer is, as both of those initiatives have similar partners, Apereo is involved more so with the open learning analytics work, but both IEDMS and Solar are involved with that, as well as with the LAMP initiative. So I do agree that there would be interesting application opportunities with that. The difficulty, though, of tying the two together too early in the game is that if one shows early success, let's say Apereo manages, because Apereo, one of the things that Solar at least was quite excited to work with Apereo on, was they have the technical expertise of large-scale software development and deployment, which is something that Solar doesn't have the expertise in, so it just made sense for that collaboration up front. But if, let's say, Apereo moves forward quickly with the Open Learning Analytics, and we are sort of taking stuttering steps toward the Learning Analytics Master's Program, to have the two of them tied together too early means that the success of one might be impeded by slower formation of the other. Down the road, I would think, you're right, there would be natural approaches to have both of those working together to have them link more formally.
So, in what may be one of the great moments in internet history, we have an internet question from somebody who's in the room. It would be a shame if standards and APIs became fragmented across IMS, OLA, and Apereo. Why not stick with IMS Calibrate?
So I probably should have been more specific in some of those comments. So we've certainly been working with IMS. There's a lot of institutions in Apereo that are IMS members that are working on Calibre. So there's some really deep connections there already. There's also folks that are working to implement the Experience API, ADL, and some of the learning record store standards and technologies. So in a sense, I would actually say OLA and Apereo are trying to bring together a lot of these different standards initiatives rather than trying to create something new. And a lot of the work happening in Apereo right now is really around implementation, proof of concept, implementations or reference implementations of these standards as a way to help all of us kind of look at them and understand the pros and cons of the different strategies that folks are using.
And the other important thing for the Open Learning Enlace initiative is that we don't just see it as a technical effort. While as much as we see it as important to be technical effort, we would also like to see involvement of other stakeholders. So we also see it as a way how we can allow people to facilitate not only data collection but also exchange of different algorithms. I will again use a fancy word that Pierre used this morning, orchestrate different also algorithms for personalization, recommendation, and I would even say even farther, visualization of different approaches, whether we are going to talk about different types of widgets or not. I think that's a kind of a community effort, and we hope that we will leverage all these different types of resources. Another theme, among other themes that came up during our Open Learning Analytics Summit, which was held after the Learning Analytics Conference, was also a learning design and learning science connection as well. So those are all important initiatives, so we would not like to see the Open Learning Analytics isolated initiative, which will be just technical architecture, but rather being a part of the bigger ecosystem around the learning analytics field.
And I'll just quickly emphasize that because something we've learned in Apereo the hard way is that when software engineers work in isolation, thinking they understand all these things, we don't produce the software that is best used by the people actually doing this stuff. So that's one of the things that really excites Apereo about being involved with groups like Solar is really getting that connection to the experts.
We have another question from the Tweetosphere. Are there overlaps between Unison and Apereo? Unison hopes to have an arm focused on analytics.
Don't make eye contact.
But Mike's not working. No, so there are actually institutions involved in both. So University of Wisconsin has been involved in both initiatives. I think the Unison project, which is just emerged, if you do a search, you'll find out if you're not more familiar with it, is very new. It's a concept at this point, so there's certainly conversations going on, but I think there needs to be a little bit more clarity around what Unison's strategy and interests are in terms of learning analytics to see if there's enough commonality to get involved. I've certainly put out on a couple of blogs myself in comments that it would probably make some sense for Unison and Apereo to be working together, and I would encourage and have encouraged folks in Unison to reach out to Apereo to engage on that. But engagement's a two-way street, so we got to wait to see what they're going to do and what they're interested in doing collaboration-wise.
More awkward questions, please?
Can we ask ourselves some questions?
You have one right there, and then I think you can.
Okay.
Well, not actually a question, more like a pre-announcement of another activity of Solar. Solar is opening the Special Interest Group call. So I think today and tomorrow will be a good opportunity to start discussing of special interest group, especially in the workshop. So if you found a small community of people that are interested in a topic and want to have some support of Solar, please start talking about how you can create this proposal. I think the call will get out on July. So just take the opportunity of the workshop to also talk about how you come together and continue your work.
Yeah, thanks, Javier. That's a great point. And Solar is really trying to engage the community so that the community can self-organize. We're rather having one central node which will be dictating what should be done or what are the important topics. We basically want to turn it to the broader audience, and the audience and the community itself should take the ownership of important ideas, and then the decisions will be inside of those special interest groups. Thanks, Javier, for reminding us of that important issue.
I just want to say how incredibly much I appreciate the attention you guys pay to forming the community. I want to mention from Twitter that Simon Buckingham says there's a Google Plus community, and he wants you all to know about that. And finally, my question, talking about all these open learning resources and the open masters, I'm particularly interested in supporting individual students, because I think a lot of the people here and the people who are not here are at institutions that might not, for the foreseeable future, have institutional support. I also know that this is a field with a huge amount of imposter syndrome, with people coming in, uncertain about their statistics, their machine learning, their computational skills, their learning theories. And I think, in addition to the actual lecture material or outlines, it would be great to have, for example, digital badges with, if we could design some really challenging assessment. It could be project-based, could be peer-based, it could be different kind of things where I could say, you know what, if I've passed this badge, it's kind of like running a marathon. Like, it's a significant achievement. You can get there through different paths. It might be doing a MOOC on Coursera, it might be watching his Moot videos, or just studying by yourself. But you know that that's something you can work towards, and you have a portfolio, because we're also applying for jobs perhaps in a field that's poorly designed, where it really helps to have something to show. And it gives us something as a community to kind of talk about and share. So just a proposal.
Yeah, there's a few things there I just want to... Oh, sorry, Ryan, were you going to...
Oh, go ahead, George.
Okay, I was just going to say there's a few things that, first of all, we've spent a lot of time thinking about. We very much, I think most of us recognize this networked architecture of our society, and this sense that you have a group of people who make decisions for others. It just doesn't work. And so we've tried to architect things in such a way, and Javier's mention of SIGs, just as one example, is we want people to make themselves a part of it by their actions rather than being tapped on the shoulder and say, hey, we want you to be a part of it. So for all of you here, I mean, what we're talking about is an open invitation, whether it's participating, following what LASE is doing, whether it's Open Learning Analytics LAMP and other initiatives. You decide and define your own interest in being involved, and no one can say, no, you can't play. Your actions and your contributions are what gets recognized. So if there's someone that says, hey, we need something badging like, we'll support and make transparent and share with others. Alyssa Wise has been sharing our mailing list. If there's resources that you want to get started or projects that you're interested in, share with us and share with her. But just make things happen. Like, we're not in an era anymore where someone can tell you what you can and cannot do. You do what's important and relevant to you, and someone picks it up and carries it forward, and you get energy by doing interesting things. So I just want to emphasize from a community end, that's really our mindset, and we've tried to architect things so that there's others that can be involved. Do we do it right all the time? No, of course not. So for example, it appears there's 5 males here, and so we've spent a lot of time as well thinking about gender balance issues and concerns. So there's other factors that do need to be architected more actively, but by and large, participation is yours to define and yours to be involved with. So if you think badging would be relevant, I mean, we saw 30 doctoral presentations here, all 30, or the majority of those 30 folks, I'm assuming if they're taking some learning analytics orientation, will likely be looking at either faculty role, but there's also startups that we mentioned earlier that are going to be looking at hiring people with analytics and learning analytics talent, because that's a big growing field in it as well. So I guess I'm just trying to articulate there's a range of options, and the biggest aspect is a cultural shift in our own views that says, if it's not there, nobody's going to make it for me, I'll build it myself. If it's relevant to others, they'll join in and help me build it better.
So that was such a good answer. I'm just going to move to the next question. So Anonymous Nyan Cat asks, that's really what it says, how could a standards-based learning record store, a la Tin Can, advance the field of learning analytics? What's needed to measure actual student learning?
So I'd probably point that person to the University of Amsterdam and work that's happening there. And actually, I think it's pretty much in production at this point, connecting the Sky Learning Management System, an open source academic collaboration system called the Open Academic Environment, and the Khan Academy, all of which have integrated the Tin Can or Experience API into those 3 platforms. They're now feeding data from those platforms into a standard open source learning record store, which shortly I think they're going to release all the code for. They will answer that question, I think, more deeply than I can here at the moment, but I think the idea of being able to bring data from very different systems into one repository has obvious implications for big data and data mining. The question I think that they're particularly interested in, that Apereo is interested in as well, is the Tin Can or Experience API in its current form the right form for learning analytics? And there's some, I think, real questions about that. ADL, who's behind that standard, has similar questions. And what we're hoping is by actually doing this reference implementation, we can begin to get answers to that, which ADL is very interested in feeding back into the specifications for the Experience or XAPIs.
Great. Do we have a last question before we close the session? Well, thank you all for your great comments and questions, and thanks to the panelists.